Hello, gentlemen.
Are
And
we
gentlemen.
live?
We are live.
Or
Yeah,
are we dead?
dead serious.
A
It's a
shocking
Halloween joke.
Uh,
twist.
jokes like you're going to start to stream it now. No. How's everybody doing tonight? Welcome to the
Welcome
this.
aboard. Yet another meeting of the Midnight Society. Oh, Rick turned into a monster again.
Yeah,
That happens.
as we expected.
Welcome
Plot
to another.
twist: the real monster was the Rick we made along the way.
Yeah. Welcome to another undertaking of scary stories. Get it? Cause Undertaker.
Crypt Keeper.
Oh yes. And
So, how is everyone dooming tonight?
Oh,
look, you're not Doctor Doom. You can't start dooming us tonight.
Can't prove it. Have you ever seen me and Doctor Doom in the same place at the same time? I rest my case.
You can't start quoting.
Now I'm just
Universal.
imagining Tales from the Crypt hosted by Dr. Doom.
Uh,
Tell me you wouldn't watch it.
I would
I would
totally
watch
watch
it.
that.
I'm sure that if Marvel keeps buying up franchises, that'll happen at some point.
Oh God. The Crypt Keeper joins the Avengers? Is that what you're suggesting?
Hey, why not? You know.
Interesting. All right.
Let's
everybody's-
see.
If everybody's
There he is. Okay.
all
I'm
right.
sorry. Go ahead, GC.
So GC starts off with that with submitted disapprove the Midnight Society, the Knights of Fear. I usually have to do some explaining when someone finds out that my official title is head on security. Most people assume that the title means that I'm in charge of all the security aspects of the amusement park that I'm employed at. This isn't actually the case. The security department is divided into two divisions. The division that I'm the head of, on-site security, is the one that is out in the park handling issues that come up, which the majority of the time are caused by the park guests. My team takes care of things such as personal belongings being stolen, breaking up arguments and fights, and removing drunk people from the park. The other division, Operation Security, handles the security issues that are more business-related. Verification of the validity of park passes, loss prevention, the stories of restaurants, monitoring employee activities, those sort of things. There's surprisingly little overlap between the duties of the two sides of the department. The big exception to this is during the annual Halloween events that are held in the park, specifically those that take place after sundown. This is by far the most difficult time of the year for security. It requires both divisions to be temporarily combined into one to make sure that there's enough coverage and manpower for the issues that are inevitably occur. There's a tricky balance between allowing guests to have a good time during the more adult-oriented events and making sure that they and the park itself are safe when they do so. Now, before I go any further, I should mention I'm bound by a large number of non-disclosure agreements. Breaking those would inevitably lead to the number of lawsuits and possibly criminal prosecutions. I have a family to think about, and because of this, I can't give the name of the amusement park that I work on or mention any real names. There should be enough here to connect the dots, however. What I can say that while it's a smaller park than, say, the various Disney and Universal, it is large enough that it attracts a high number of visitors each year during the summer season. That number goes down sharply once school starts in the fall. Due to this decline, the park shifts to only being open on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays until it shuts down completely for the winter beginning in the first week of November. Starting in September, the park is given a Halloween-themed makeover. That makeover is kept family-friendly during the daylight operation hours, and the various cartoon mascots that wander the park wear costumes, tents are set up for the children that can trick-or-treat, and decorations cover pretty much everything. While the water rides are already closed for that season, the water inside them is temporarily dyed orange or green. A maze made of hay bales is constructed near the park's side entrance. It really is a good time for both children and their parents. Just before sundown, the park is closed for an hour, and crews work during this time to remove or modify any of the decorations to make the park look and feel more sinister. A small army of actors arrive dressed in macabre costumes, and new haunted house attractions are prepped up for visitors, and menus at the various restaurants and food stops are changed to include less food and far more alcoholic options. This is the park's annual Night of Fear, or Nights of Fear promotion. Again, not the actual name, but close enough for you to connect the dots. Open to anyone 18 or older, it's huge maker that is also a huge pain in the ass for security. The atmosphere is designed to be creepy as well as rather adult-orientated. The actors that are hired for the season roam the park in designated areas called scare zones, where they jump out at unsuspecting guests and try to look threatening instead of ridiculous. Others work inside of attractions that are basically flashier versions of those haunted houses or haunted walks that pop around Halloween. And here's how this breaks down in regards to the incident. You have a security team that has been greatly reduced in size because the park is only open 3 days a week, not to mention once that isn't used to working together because of the cobbled together for 2 different divisions. The event takes place at night, which is far more difficult to monitor than the activities that take place during the day. There's influx of temporary employees in the form of the scare actors. The park itself has been decorated, often with large and complex displays that can block cameras and create blind spots. Finally, there's alcohol. Lots and lots of alcohol. It's a difficult situation for everyone behind the scenes. The security staff is stretched thin in there, and inevitably, incidents every single night, many of which we don't find out about until the next day. And to say that it's an all-hands-on-deck situation is putting it mildly. 9 days ago, we had just passed the 11 o'clock mark during one such night. Normally I patrol the park with the majority of the other security guards during even event nights. There's a lot of ground to cover and not many people to do it with. I need to coordinate security while almost handling the issue personally, and it's one of the few things that I enjoy about the Nights of Fear event. I get to be outside in the fresh air instead of seated behind my desk in my stuffy office. I had just returned to the office to swap out a dead walkie-talkie, and we typically use cell phones to communicate, but some of the haunted house attractions don't play well with digital signals, so we carry the walkies as well. I built down a new unit and turned to go back out the door, but I was stopped when one of the 2 security guards watching the security camera feeds called me over. He quickly rewound a clip and played it back to me. It was in black and white, which is typical when the cameras switch themselves over to night vision mode. A small group of people walked by a store that I recognized as one of the gift shops in the back half of the park. There didn't seem to be anything out of the ordinary, and I opened my mouth to say so. I closed it again and frowned as a figure walked into view. It was a person dressed in a costume. It was hard to tell from the position of the camera, but he seemed to be wearing a pumpkin-like mask and was dressed in a long black coat. He was holding either a baseball bat or some kind of long club. I picked up the clipboard that was hanging from a nearby hook and quickly scanned through the contents. It was a complete list of all the actors and the costumes that had been assigned. Each was featured to a particular area of the park. Zombie costumes outside the rave from the grave haunted house. Werewolf costumes for the pack hunt scare zone, that sort of thing. There was often a list that fit the description of what I was seeing on the video, though. With an annoying sigh, I went back into the park, and if it wasn't one of the actors, like it was a guest wearing a costume. And there were strict rules against that to make sure that everyone knew who was part of the event and who wasn't. During the day, the children were allowed to dress up, but no adults were allowed to wear costumes like that at any time. Most of the guards in the park were busy, and the office wasn't far from the place where the camera had recorded the individual. I said I'd take care of it myself. It shouldn't take long. And from that general area of the park, I could easily make my way over to the heavier traffic areas. I radioed for the control room to send a copy of the video over to my phone. The guest was no longer wearing the mask. I might as well be able to track him down based on the clothes he was wearing. As I walked past the entrance to be one of the roller coasters, an actor dressed as a deranged clown stepped out of the shrubs. I noticed him point at the green glow-in-the-dark lanyard around my neck. He returned a nod and went back into the bushes. All the park staff were wearing the same lanyard, and there was a variation of the lanyards that guests could purchase if they didn't want to be jump-scared, and the various scare zones throughout the park. Those guests were issued glowing orange ones, and the staff were green. I followed along the path wrapped around the roller coaster, passed by groups of guests as I went. I looked closely at each person, but I didn't see anyone that matched what I was seeing the camera feed. Roughly 10 minutes after leaving the office, I arrived at my destination. The store wasn't one of the ones that was open for Night of Fears. The windows were dark, and a large close sign hung on the door. I hadn't really expected a costume guest to still be there, and he wasn't. Still, it was a place to start. My cell phone vibrated and received a camera feed video. I stepped off the path into the store doorway, and so that I was out of the way of the crowd. Taking my phone out of the pocket, I watched the video again. I noticed something I hadn't the first time. Right before the figure walked out of frame, he turned slightly and walked at an angle, now taking him off the main path. I looked in the direction he'd gone in. There was a gate in the fence that separated the public from the maintenance area. The gate was closed, but the padlock was lying on the concrete in front of it. I retrieved the lock and examined it closely, and it hadn't been unlocked. It had been broken. This was no longer a simple matter of a guest wearing a costume. I pulled the walkie-talkie off my belt and raided the control room to request backup. One of the most important rules of Nights of Fear security was to never go into a potentially dangerous situation alone. It took a while for anyone to answer, much longer than it should have. And when somebody finally got back to me, I was informed that a brawl had broken out of two groups of college kids at the other side of the park. Everyone was either committed there or was dealing with one of the other smaller issues that were happening. That meant I had to make a choice. Either I continued my search alone, going against both policy and common sense, or I'd risk losing the trespasser by waiting for other security guards to become available. Under normal circumstances, I would have gladly opted for the latter instead of the former. The problem was that I wasn't in a normal circumstance. The maintenance area had to have been broken into directly under one of the roller coasters, and if you were familiar with it, this area was safe enough. If you weren't, however, there were multiple places where the coaster track came down to the ground level at the bottom of the large hills. At the speed they were traveling at, the cars could easily injure or kill a person in their path. There was a very good reason that maintenance areas like this one were only to be used when the ride was shut down. Even if the trespasser was able to avoid being struck by the ride, what if he somehow caused damage to the track or obstructed it some way? That would endanger the riders. I considered things for a moment before swearing in frustration, radioing the officer who had the roller coaster temporarily stopped. I would have to go in, sweep the area, make sure that no one was still in there, and lock it back down. There was a time limit as well. A lot of inebriated people would be waiting in line, and for the sake of the park employees operating the ride, it was best to make sure they weren't waiting for too long. I waited for a few minutes before I got confirmation from the office that the ride was stopped and all the cars were off the track. At the same time, I watched as the green lights above the roller coaster station turned red. Nodding to myself, I took out my flashlight and proceeded into the maintenance area. It was oddly quiet. Out of the main area of the park, the guests and rides kept up a constant high level of noise. The maintenance area was fenced off, which, combined with the roller coaster being shut down, muted much of the cacophony of sounds. It was almost a shock when I realized that I could hear my own footsteps. I had only been walking for a minute or two when I noticed another noise. It was the sound of metal scraping on concrete. Because of the way it echoed, it was difficult to pin down where it was coming from, and I stopped and listened when I got my bearings. Most of the area under the roller coaster was hard, compacted dirt rather than concrete, and the only places where the sound could be coming from were around the support struts from the ride, which seemed unlikely, or the large poured pad that the maintenance sheds were secured to. There weren't a lot of lights, and the ones that were spaced throughout the maintenance area didn't do much. I was used to walking through the park at night long after the last guest had arrived. A lot of people would find that unnerving or, I don't know, creepy, but I always found it to be relaxing. This was different. I grew more and more nervous with each step, and I started to get jumpy around every shadow. I stopped walking and mentally scoffed myself for acting like a child before continuing on. The noise stopped as I came to the sheds. It was replaced by a new sound, a more low and almost an audible whimpering. I hurried forward, clearly someone was hurt. And I came to a 6-foot wide gap between two of the sheds and abruptly halted. Couldn't tell what it was looking at. The space was dark, but I could just make out a large figure standing at the far end with his back turned towards me. Remembered the flashlight I was holding. I shined a beam forward just in time to see the person raise his arm up over his head. The light reflected off something metal in the person's hand as the arm swung downward. It was a thick piece of rebar. The pole struck something that I couldn't see around due to the man's bulk, and the whimpering abruptly ceased. I pulled my taser free from its holster. While security at the park didn't typically carry weapons of any kind, an exception was made during the Nights of Fear events. This is because the crimes that happen during these events tend to be more violent or something threatening to the guards themselves. I identified myself and ordered the figure to turn around and face me, and there was a long pause when nothing happened. I was just about to give the order again when the man slowly did as he had getting towed. I nearly dropped the taser. The man was tall, nearly 7 feet. He was wearing a long black coat that was buttoned up to his neck, and he had the pants and boots to match. His hands were gloved, and in his right hand was the rebar pole that I caught a glimpse of. All of these details I took in verifically, and my gaze was locked on his head. The security feed had made me think that he was wearing a pumpkin mask. This wasn't the case. His head was shaved. It was painted with orange and black makeup that made it resemble a warped jack-o'-lantern. His eyes, though, they just weren't there. I don't know how to describe it. Where his eyes should have been were two dark voids with the light from the flashlights couldn't penetrate. I stared at them, not really comprehending what I was looking at. His appearance was so striking that it took me a bit to notice the blood dripping from the rebar. I lowered the flashlight slightly so that the beam was focused on the metal, and bits of flesh and hair were stuck to it. I remembered the whimper that had been silenced and tilted my head to look beyond the man. I could barely make out the remains of a person on the ground. The head had been mangled to the point it was barely recognized as a human. The man started to advance towards me. With every step he took forward, I took 2 back. I still had a taser pointed at him, but I doubt it would do any good, and not only that, the man was massive. But he was also heavily closed from his neck down. The probe would have a hard time to get a good connection. I had to try, though, and it needed to be before he got too close, and I pointed the taser at the center of mass and fired. And the probe stuck into his coat in the chest region, and electricity began to flow. The man stopped moving and looked down at them. He brushed at them with his hand like they were flies, and they came free of the coat and clattered to the ground. With that done, he started to come towards me, and once again, the rebar still clutched to his hand. I hurriedly backed out of the way as he approached, ready to run at any moment, but when he reached the end of the small alley, he simply walked past me without pause. I stared up at him in confusion as he went by. The walkie-talkie emitted a burst of static with surprising speed. The man turned, reached out, and pulled it free off my belt. He squeezed his hand and crushed the device flat. The noise ceased. He opened his fingers and let the broken parts fall to the ground before continuing on his way. Taking one last look at him, I hurried down the short path to the body on the ground, and to my surprise, the person was still alive. I wouldn't have thought that anyone could survive the wounds that they had suffered, but it was clear that wouldn't be the case for much longer. The bloodshed had been so thorough that it wasn't possible to determine things such as gender and age. There was just this lump of blood and flesh. I looked back over my shoulder at the man as he turned and disappeared out behind one of the sheds. The amount of strength that this horrible act required was unbelievable. I thought back to his eyes, those black holes with nothing in them, and I shuddered. The remains of this person died a few minutes later, and there was nothing I could do except make sure that they didn't die alone. Once they were gone, I hurried out of the space between the sheds to try to find the killer, but he was no longer there. My radio broke, and I didn't have much of a choice about how to proceed. I had to rush back to the office to call the local police. Over the next few hours, my staff and I looked through the security camera footage as closely as humanly possible. There was no signs of the man, and couldn't find any video of him leaving the maintenance area. When the police searched for the rest of the night and into the morning, they came up empty-handed. Everyone was at a loss as to how he had disappeared. Because of what happened, the local police began to patrol with the security staff every night, and the park was open, and that was 9 days ago. A week after the first killing, we caught sight of the man on the security cameras again. This time, it was in a different part of the park, and just outside one of the haunted house attractions. I took 3 other guards with me and rushed over, but he was gone again by the time we got there. Behind the house, pushed up against a dumpster hidden from views of the guests, another dead body. Last night was the 3rd killing, and the staff watching the cameras didn't see the man initially, but a mutilated corpse was found at the top of the waterfall in one of the water attractions. We reviewed the tapes, and we discovered a clip of less than a second where you could see the man walking behind one of the rocks in the attraction. Tonight, a member of my staff and police officer managed to catch the man in the act, and he dragged a woman in her early 20s behind a carousel by her hair, and they got there just as he was about to stab her with the broken bottle. The officer immediately opened fire with his sirens, and 2 of the shots connected with the target. The man staggered before falling to one knee. The officer put his empty gun back into his holster, took out a pair of handcuffs, and arrested as the security guard railed in for backup, and had the ride stopped. When he got close, the man suddenly stood up and grabbed the officer by the throat, and he turned to one side and held the struggling officer out towards the spinning carousel. One of the house horses came racing by and smashed into the side of his head, and I could hear the rider screaming all the way to the entrance. None of us caught by the cameras. It was relayed to me by a security guard that was witnessing it. The man left to be alive for a reason I don't understand. He did, however, pause long enough to jam the remains of the broken bottle into the woman's chest before disappearing once again into the night. Today is Sunday. The park will be closed for the next 4 days. When Friday comes around again, though, I had to believe that there will be more killings, and before I sat down to write this, I put in a call to the head of operations of the company that owns the amusement park. I'm still trying to process what he told me. Despite the dangers to the guests, the park won't be canceled the night of Fear's event. It all comes down to dollars to cents, you see. This is one of those most profitable times of the year for the park, and attendance has actually been gone up since the killing started. I don't know if people think it's just a publicity stunt or if it simply makes it more exciting for them to think that they're in the presence of a real serial killer. Whatever the case, the police won't be shutting it down either. The event is good for the local economy, not just the park. And the people who make decisions here in town aren't going to give up their cash cow. I'm going to be ordering my staff not to engage with the face-painted man. So far, he hasn't attacked any of us, although I think he was close to doing so when I used my taser on him. We're going to stay out of his way and hope that the police present at the park will be able to stop him. I'm not willing to needlessly throw away the lives of my people. Someone is stuck in the Nights of Fear, and there's not a damn thing any of us can do about it.
Nice.
That brings back memories of when I worked at Halloween Horror Nights at Universal.
Mm.
The attractions, the rides, the homicidal maniac. It was great.
Nice. Alrighty.
So who's next on our
I am.
cavalcade of creepy?
Let me just get the story. This is a fan submission. It is by user themaskisnowoff, who's there over in the channel right now. He wrote something short that's kind of haunting. I really like it. So let me pull it up here. It's called "To the Sound of Drums," submitted for the approval of the Midnight Society. Starts with a quote: "A few more brief decades of years, and we'll be as the pioneers are now, gone, forgotten." Hervey Scott, 1876. Smoke. All one could see around was smoke. God's breath had heaved into their faces, kicking dust and the muck into their bodies. The small trenches covered them only barely from the mosquitoes and other insects. Black smoke drooled in with the fog, the cannons finally silencing themselves. The men couldn't see the army on the other side due to the thickness of the fog. The men of the 34th, 56th, and 39th Georgia slumped into the trenches, their eyes sunken, mouths drooping. Silence permeated between them. An old friend who rarely came by, but was someone you loved when they did. However, silence also brought hunger, the one you wanted gone. The one you wanted to kill. The men chose to ignore hunger again, an ever-ending Ouroboros of hope than hurt. Major Charles E. Broyles festered his pockets, his black, blistered, burned hands causing him to wince every time he moved it. After a bit, he brought out a damp cigar and sighed. He turned to the other men with a combination of request and sadness. The other men just shook their heads in unison, marionettes on a string. Charles put his head back a little, looking up at the fog, swirling like a dancer who had no partner. Off in the distance, nearly silent, faint drumming could be heard. The men allowed it to whiz through their ears, tickling the blood of their friends, commanders, and comrades off their brains, their guts, their hearts. The drumming continued on, never wavering. "Johnson," Colonel Elihu Watkins mumbled through the wind. The fog rolled between them like a train, catching their breath and taking it far away. "Yes, Colonel," Johnson replied with a hint of dissatisfaction, his eyes wincing as they opened. Bits and pieces of another man were starting to dry off on his nearly tattered shirt. Watkins handed Johnson a piece of his pants, dried pieces of mud, sweat, blood, and other fluids squelching off of it. Watkins slowly dragged himself on his good leg, the other limping like a dog behind him. On it read a small note: "To Brigadier General Alfred Cumming. We're running low on ammunition to stop these Yankee bastards. Please send whatever you've got left. Colonel Elihu Watkins, 56th Georgia." Johnson looked at the note curiously, reading every line as carefully as he could. After a bit, he then looked above from the trenches. Like an impenetrable wall, the fog moved slowly along the ground, covering one's vision all the way to the sky. Only the sounds of drums in the distance carried any other sign of life. "See what I can do," Johnson replied quickly, and hopped over the trenches as if fire had been lit under him. Only an outline of him cut through the fog, and then he was swallowed into the gray abyss. The other men watched him and then slumped back into their cookie-cutter positions. They stared at each other, each seeing how slimmer and slimmer the other got by the day. They had tried anything to keep themselves entertained, but alas, it was all in vain. Night, like a blanket, slowly overlapped itself over the men. The only difference between being that they could no longer see each other. The small lighter boils had ran out of fluid some time ago. Only the breathing, harsh and ragged as it was, of the other men kept the men from thinking that they were dead. Of asked nothing when you couldn't move, couldn't crawl back to civilization and grasp the waist of someone you hold dear, see the friends of your life grow, die, and at some point you as well. Jackson was the first to fall asleep from exhaustion. While there was some concern about Johnson, they let it go that he was lost and they would find his body sooner or later. Was it blown apart by grape shot? Was it bayoneted and left to be soaked in by the dirt? Who cares? Everyone but Watkins fell asleep shortly after. His eyes panged his skull like an earthquake, wanting to shut but forced to wait until a silhouette reared into life. However, he couldn't hold it for long, and soon sleep lulled him into her comforting bosom. Slurring vortexes of hands churned on the ground like snakes. Screams gonged the daylight out of the sky. He ran as fast as he could. It trumpeted over him, the world colliding into itself. Men around him feared to look back. "It's that damn man! It's him!" Voices snuffed out. Candles melted down into nothing. "Help me! Help me, please!" Wounded crawled towards him, gnarled and gnawed, teeth like glass. He screamed as something came down on his head. A wailing pierced the morning, a flute to offset the drums. A mix between a fox yelp and a death rattle, mixed in with a smoker's lung. The men, with the exception of Watkins, stood up, rifles and revolvers at the ready. Then they hopped over the trench and ran. Watkins slithered onto the top of the trench to see what the noise was. A bloodied man came forth, the Grim Reaper in a man's skin. His left foot dragged itself across the ground. Crazed helplessness and turmoil bludgeoned itself onto Johnson's face, his clothes all but gone. The other men helped him down into the trench, his eyes pulling themselves out of the sockets. These ain't drummers. These ain't drummers, he kept repeating to himself. The fog lifted then and there like a light switch. The rest of the battlefield lay waste by cannon shot and melee shot. Men carried off to the medical tent, hanging on that vicarious line. What pervaded the wind was only silence. The drums had been laid down for now. That's it.
And then it turned out it was Ringo.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, Ringo.
Ringo.
Oh man, your voice was a really good fit for that one.
Thank you.
It's it has so much life being read out loud.
And that was a very game Southern accent you did there.
Yeah, I'm probably the least. I'm probably the most northern out of all this group except for GC. But
yeah, it's hard to get more northern than GC.
Beg your pardon. Okay,
You get more northern than GC, and you're basically Santa Claus.
Yeah. Santa Cat.
All right.
Santa Cat, Santa Cat.
I believe it's you.
Next up.
Me? Next
Yeah,
up?
Miffix.
Yeah.
All right. Here we go. For the approval of the Midnight Society, I present the fourth child. My mother's siblings and I moved into this awesome new house a few months ago. It's a really cool plantation-style home out in what was once a rural area outside of New Orleans. By now, the area is a little bit more built up, so it's really more like a spacious suburb. Anyways, it had been about 9 months since our father died. My mom really wanted us to get away from our old house. It was full of too many memories. She wanted us to have a cool, spacious house to play in and give us a fresh start. Apparently, we got this place at a decent deal because the former owner was this old woman who passed away, and her family wanted to get the extra house off their hands. She died peacefully in her sleep, but it still made us a little uncomfortable, so no one moved into her bedroom. We just let it be a guest room if anyone had visitors. We have a wonderful neighbor named Miss Leah who lives next door to us, about a half-mile away. She's a small but powerfully built woman who welcomed us into the area with open arms. The former owner of the house was an old friend of hers who she visited all the time, and my own mother soon took on the role of her new friend. They immediately became best friends, always giggling in our kitchen on the weekends. Miss Leah loved telling tales of voodoo and even practices it herself. Many people in New Orleans do. She mostly practices what she calls the light voodoo, like charms for good luck or protection. She told me that you can talk to spirits if you write them letters and put them in a place where they know where to find them. I started seeing her every now and again, late at night when I can't sleep, sticking envelopes in our mailbox. I could see it from the window. When I'd go out in the morning, though, no envelopes would be there. One night, I saw her doing the usual mailbox routine, and as soon as she walked far away enough, I ran out to see what she was putting in the mailboxes. I saw a little silvery, unaddressed letter to Maggie, which turns out to be the name of the old lady who lived in the house before us. I always thought Miss Leah was joking about talking to the dead, but it's clear she does practice it herself. Just to test things out, I stood at that mailbox and watched it for a few hours. Eventually, the sun began to break over the horizon, so I figured I'd waited long enough. I opened the mailbox, and the letter was gone. At first, I was in complete disbelief, but then I was overcome with excitement. If Miss Leah could talk to Maggie, maybe I could talk to my dad. I keep a little shoebox under my own bed. It's full of little trinkets and pictures that remind me of my dad. I go through it every now and again when I miss him most, as a sort of therapy. A few nights after trying to rationalize what happened with the note to Maggie, I decided that the best way to test it out myself was to try it myself. I wrote a letter to my dad, which felt silly at first because I don't know what dead people like to talk about. I wrote, "Dear Daddy, I miss you. How are things on the other side? Mom bought this cool house for us and we have a fun neighbor lady named Miss Leah. We're all doing okay over here, but I especially miss waking up every morning to the sounds of your loud singing in the shower. I hated it back then, but now I realize how funny and charming it was. Sincerely, Julia." I placed the note into my special shoebox and slipped it under the bed. When I woke up in the morning, it wasn't there. I wasn't sure how to handle it. Did he really get the message? Does he write back? What do I do now? Well, I still needed to go to school that day, so the excitement of my supernatural letter writing subsided, and I headed over to the bathroom to get ready. My older brother was singing his lungs out in the shower, which is a little weird for him, but I figured he was trying to become more like our dad. I knocked on the door. "Hurry up in there! I gotta pee!" The singing continued. "Jake, how long are you gonna take?" The singing continued. Then someone clapped on my shoulder. I turned around and it was Jay. He said, "Calm down, Julia. I'm not in the bathroom. Is the door locked? Let me see if I can jimmy it open for you." He opened the door with ease. The bathroom was empty. No singing, the shower wasn't running, but the tub was wet. I walked in and started brushing my teeth, amused by what had just happened. I noticed the mirror was even a little bit foggy, as though from shower steam. There was a message written in the mirror. It said, "How bad do you miss me?" I walked the fine line between being totally freaked out and super excited that my dad was communicating with me. I wrote another letter that very night. "I miss you more than you can possibly imagine, Daddy. Don't ever doubt that. But tell me, how are things on the other side?" That morning, I woke up. The letter in the shoebox was gone, but I noticed a new letter near my door. It looked like someone slipped it under there. I opened it up. It said, "What do you want most from me?" I found it weird that my dad wasn't really carrying the conversation well, but I decided I'd write a quick response and go to school. I wrote back, "Well, I guess what I want most for you is to come back and play with me like old times. But I know that's silly." When I got back from school, I went straight to my room to check on the letter. I opened my door, and my dollhouse, which you stored in the attic, was smacked in the middle of my floor. My mother had been at work all day. My brother was still at swim practice, and my sister went to the mall with her friend after dropping me off at home. I don't know who could have moved it, except maybe my dad. I saw a note next to the dollhouse. It said, "Play with me." My body froze. Something was unsettling about this whole setup. I didn't feel like I was in danger or anything, but I just wasn't comfortable. I walked to Miss Leah's house, and she was sitting in her rocking chair on the front porch with her cat, Rufus, in her lap. I told her I knew about the letter she wrote to Maggie. Ah, yes, sweetheart, she said. Even though he's passed, I haven't stopped talking to Miss Maggie one bit. She was my best friend. And I want her to know how much I love her and how much Rufus misses the little tuna treat she'd give him. I write her almost every day, just updating her on my life so that when I pass, I too, it'll be like we didn't miss a beat together. She asked me if I was thinking about writing to the dead as well. For some reason, I didn't feel comfortable telling Miss Leah that I had been writing to my dad already. I told her I was considering writing a letter to my dad and that I would try it out that night. She laughed. Okay, honey, you'll have to let me know how it goes tomorrow. I played with Rufus for a little while as Miss Leah talked on the phone with her nephew. The sun started going down and I figured it was about time for dinner. So I said goodbye to Miss Leah and Rufus and walked back over to my house. My mom and everyone else were already back. Oh my God, where have you been? My mom yelled. I told her I had been hanging out with Miss Leah, which eased her nerves a little bit since she knew I'd been alone for a while. That part scared her. My sister was grounded for abandoning me for the afternoon to go to the mall, but she said it was smart for me to go to Miss Leah's. She then said, "You know that dollhouse was expensive, right?" Which seemed like an odd question, so I answered, "Yeah, I suppose, why?" And she explained, "Well, I guess I just wish you had taken better care of it is all. I saw it in your room when I was looking for you, and I could see you picked off all its paint, and there were some dings and dents, and I thought it was just such a shame. Next time you're getting something from the attic, wait until I get home and I can help you, honey." Bewildered by my mom's comment, I ate my dinner in silence. Afterwards, I helped with the dishes and made my way back up to my room with apprehension. It seemed like the dollhouse was in great condition last I saw, so I knew something must have happened after I left. I prayed that my mom was just seeing things, that the dollhouse was indeed exactly how I left it. I opened my door. My mom was wrong. The dollhouse wasn't a little dinged up. It had been ripped to bits. Its tattered remains were strewn about the floor. Even my little dolls were mangled with arms snapped backwards and their heads missing. I couldn't fathom what had just happened. Then I saw the letter. "Why won't you play with me?" My hair stood on end. I could feel the rage emanating through the room. I tried to rationalize. I tried to tell myself that the context made me sense the rage, but there was nothing to worry about. But how can you rationalize things when you're writing letters to dead people who break your furniture? I felt terrible when I'd upset my father this way. He bought me that dollhouse myself, so it must have hurt him to destroy it. I immediately wrote a new letter to my dad saying, "Daddy, I'm so sorry for not playing with you. I love you, but I think we need to let go. You belong on the other side, and I belong here. I just want to say one more thing to you, something I never got the chance to say before. Goodbye, Daddy. Julia." I slept in my brother's bed that night. He was nice about it, didn't even ask what I was afraid of. He could tell I was disturbed, and he didn't want to push me. Before we went to bed, he said one thing. "You know there's no such thing as monsters, right?" "Yes," I whispered. At that point, I wasn't sure if I was lying or not. It was still comforting to say it. I didn't think I was dealing with a monster. At least I wasn't sure about it. I didn't even really know what a monster was supposed to be. A dragon? A boogeyman in your closet? An angry dad? The next day was Saturday, and I still wasn't comfortable about being in my room for too long. I got dressed and walked to Miss Leah's. I wanted to leave the house without checking the shoebox. It felt like I was leaving behind an angry parent, and I wanted to give them some time to cool off before we talked again. Miss Leah was sitting with Rufus as usual, and they both watched the blue jays hop around their yard. Rufus slightly more attentive than Miss Leah for the birds. "Well, hey there, sweetheart," Miss Leah called out. "How'd it go last night?" I knew she was talking about the letter, and I knew she'd know exactly how to fix things, but before I could begin speaking, she interrupted. "Let me guess, it didn't work." "Why would you say that?" I asked. "Because I know better than anyone that spirits can't move physical objects. I have to use my special charm paper to write to Maggie, and I doubt you got any charm paper." I felt a little ashamed for that. I'm not quite sure why. I guess I just felt like I'd been deceiving her. I didn't tell her the whole story. I just told her I thought it worked because the letter was gone. Well, Julia, my best guess is you got a prankster in your house. Probably your brother. He's too silly for his age. She went on about all the things she's told Maggie. She said it didn't happen often, as it was hard for Maggie's frail spirit to do much of anything except read. But sometimes Maggie would write back. Maggie hadn't crossed over yet, but when she did cross over, she wouldn't be able to get the letters anymore. She said she loved Miss Leah and her letters, but one day she'd need to move on. She said eventually, Miss Leah wouldn't have the strength to write letters, and they would become fewer and fewer. Once Maggie knew it was too hard for Miss Leah to write anymore, she'd cross over and wait patiently with Petunia, another one of Miss Leah's cats who had passed. Maggie said Miss Leah would know when she crossed over because her letters would stay in the mailbox and no one would take them. I wandered home later that afternoon, wondering if my dad was ever going to cross over. I wasn't sure how to feel. I know what I saw, and I know what I did. I wrote letters to my dad. I left them where he'd check, the shoebox. They were gone later. I heard him in the shower. I saw his message in the mirror. I saw the dollhouse and his notes. I know no one in the house could have moved the dollhouse. I was certain it was Daddy. I arrived in my room, fragments of the dollhouse still scattered on the floor. I remembered the last letter I wrote, the one that asked my dad to move on. I was afraid he'd be angry with me. I was afraid he'd accuse me of not loving him enough, of lying to him. I didn't want to check the box, but I needed to see if he at least got the message. I opened it, and the letter was gone. But in its place was a new letter. It said Julia on the cover, so I knew it was for me. I figured he wrote back. I opened it, and I was horrified at what I saw. Daddy isn't here. I bolted down the stairs and prepared to run back to Miss Leah's and explain everything, but I didn't have to. There she was, giggling with my mom in the kitchen. I started walking towards them, but there was something on the other side of between the kitchen and the living room where I could still see it, but they couldn't. We had a framed picture of Dad there in order to remember him. There was a note on the picture that said, "Say a word, and they're dead." I wasn't sure what to do. I knew I needed to keep quiet, but I also knew something very, very sinister was going on, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. My brother and sister were going to a big house party, and my mom wanted to go hang out with her girlfriends that night, so Miss Leah actually came over to take me to her house for the night. My mom tried to apologize for the late notice, but I was so excited to get out of the house and away from whatever that thing was, that she didn't even get to finish her apology. That night, Miss Leah let me stay up late with her and Rufus. At around 12, she started writing a letter on her special charm paper. It was very thin, and it glowed this silvery hue. I asked her how to make it, and she says it comes from the soul. We walked to my house together and put the letter in the mailbox. The next day, my mom came and picked me up, and we stopped by the mailbox because someone had pulled the lever up. There was a note from Miss Leah there, and I knew exactly who it was from. The paper had the same thinness and silvery glow. My mom wrote it off as someone dropping it off in the wrong box and asked if I would run it to Miss Leah. I sprinted down the street to Miss Leah's. She opened the letter and began reading it while I sat and waited with Rufus. When she was done, her face paled. All the color drained. She trembled. She was clearly disturbed. She told me not to go home, that she'd call my mom and everyone would come over for lunch. She immediately put down the letter and picked up her phone. Once her back was turned, I took the letter to read it. Dearest Leah, so sorry I've taken such a long time to write back to you. It seems that I lack the spiritual power necessary to write. Heck, I could barely even write when I was alive and had hands. The lady who moved into my old house with her family is as lovely as ever, and I want you to know I've been watching y'all's friendship and I'm happy for you. I miss giggling in the kitchen with you, but watching you and her talk is almost as good. I'll bet you met all her children as well. Most of them are as sweet as can be. Jay has a heart of gold and seems to really care for the family. Catherine has a great sense of humor, always making me and the rest of the family laugh. Julia is a curious little one. She reminds me a bit of you. Then there's the fourth child. It's a vicious little thing. You know the one I'm talking about? The one with the black eyes and the long dark claws? It lives in my old room and it's always causing a ruckus. I'm glad I'm dead because that scoundrel really gives me the creeps. It watches poor Julia as she sleeps and leaves awful little notes around the house. I noticed the other day that it started taking knives out of the drawers at night and bringing them under the bed. That mother should really do something about keeping it under control. Perhaps you could help? Can't wait to hear from you next. Fondly, Maggie. I couldn't breathe. I just sat frozen as Miss Leah screamed into the phone. Oh my god, please tell me you are okay. Pick up the phone. Please, please, please. Pick up the phone. She decided to call 911, and when the police got to my house, Miss Leah and I waited outside. They found my mom, my brother, my sister. They found them all over the house, lacerated into shreds. They couldn't determine how it happened, figured it was a wild animal or something. But Miss Leah and I know what happened. While we were waiting outside the house, we both looked up into my bedroom window. Standing there, in the room where I slept that night, was a black-eyed child with an evil grin that stretched ear to ear. It raised one sharp finger to its mouth as if to say, shh.
That was good. Creepy.
Man, that is a rude house guest.
Chucky Kruger confirmed.
Chucky
imposed
Kruger,
upon
I
them?
like that.
Oh my god. I do
I
not
love that game,
think
Cobra.
I do not think I would invite that guest back.
Nah.
Hmm.
All right,
That was
Ho, ho, ho.
it's now my turn.
It is
Yeah.
no time.
Yes! Let's go!
For the approval. Yeah. Thank you, Miffix, for being so excited. At least somebody is.
Oh heck! We're all excited, Miller.
Oh yeah.
Thank you. All right, for the approval of the Menace Society, I wish to submit Something Went Wrong with My Heart Transplant by KatrinCiernan. I've always had a weak heart. Not just physically. I've always been afraid of my own shadow. It was unsurprising when the doctors told me my heart murmur wasn't just a heart murmur. A year of tests, a year of therapy, constant trips to the hospital, and I was finally told that it had all been for nothing. My poor weak heart wouldn't last until Christmas. It's a strange thing being told that you're dying. I didn't come to terms with it at first. I drank, I spent money. I did reckless, stupid things because I was so damn scared. Then I got the news that a young woman called Laura had been declared brain dead and that I, the lucky chosen one, would be getting a brand new heart a week later. I drove to the hospital slowly, carefully, and readied myself for the ordeal that was to come. As I was laying in bed on the first night, the thought of Laura swirled around in my head, and it wouldn't leave me alone. It was like her name was in flashing lights every time I closed my eyes. It was wrong. I know it was. But I had to see the woman who was giving me her heart. It didn't feel right not to put a face to the one who was saving my life. I knew her name. I knew what ward she was staying on. I had overheard the two nurses discussing it. I wandered down the meandering hallways until I found what I was looking for, taking my time, making sure I didn't miss any name. I guess I had time on my hands now. In the second to last room, she lay in a bed. A woman sat on the bed next to her, holding her hand, and my own weak heart stuttered. Excuse me. I had no idea what to say to her. I'm Jenna. I'm the person... I'm having surgery tomorrow, and... Who I assumed was Laura's mother stood up, and I could tell from the look in her eye that she knew who I was. Thank you for visiting. I know it's strange, but a part of her is going to be living on in you. I wanted to meet you. I stood there, helpless and lost for words. Laura's mother beckoned me over. Please, she said, don't feel uncomfortable. It's what she would have wanted. I sat on the chair next to Laura. How did she... I broke off. It was too awful to ask. Laura's mother gave me a thin smile. She was a care worker, looked after battered wives, abused women. Last month she met a guy and... Well, I suppose years of training can't help you when you're in love. She ignored the warning signs, and he killed her. She dedicated her life to those who needed her. Laura's mother looked down. I didn't know why I did it, but I reached over and I held Laura's hand. I squeezed it. I'm so sorry. I had a boyfriend once who... He was like that too. Someone like Laura convinced me to leave. Laura's mother gave me another half smile. I could see the tears in her eyes. Then Laura squeezed my hand. Tightly. She gripped me so hard that her fingernails dug into my skin. I recoiled, a look of horror on my face. Laura's mother looked at me calmly. She squeezes her hands sometimes as well. I think the doctors called it muscle spasms. Either way, there's none of Laura left in there anymore. I looked at the small crescent moons that had just started to bleed on the palm of my hand. The surgery went perfectly. I was wheeled to the recovery suite after it was over and done with. Sorry. The raised wound on my chest covered by gauze. It was better if I didn't see it, I thought. I didn't need any more heart issues. I spent the first day doped up on the pain medication, eating only a little and sitting up maybe 2 times. It was a long process, they reassured me. Laura's mother came to visit me the day before I was due to leave. Her calm demeanor hadn't wavered, but I could see that she was suffering. She looked 10 years older, and her hands shook when she gave me a hug. When are you going home? Tomorrow, I told her. Please, come visit whenever you want. I started to jot down my address for her when, out of the corner of my eye, a flash of blonde disappeared through the doorway. The same brilliant blonde as Laura's hair. Ow! I cried out suddenly. It felt like someone had sharply squeezed my hand so hard it had almost crushed the bones. Laura's mother rushed to my side, a look of concern in her eyes. What's wrong? Is it your heart? She stumbled over the last words, coming to terms with what she had said. I tried to reassure her and said I'd let the doctors know, and she left with a look of worry on her face. When I looked down, a new set of crescent fingernail marks were below the ones that Laura had made. 10 identical bleeding smiles. The taxi ride home was short, and before I knew it, I was back in my own flat. It felt strange to try and slip back into where I had left off. My life had been almost over the last time I had been here. I looked over the mess in the cardboard boxes, the remnants of one night where I had tearfully tried to pack and store my belongings so my parents wouldn't have to do it after I died. Laura's heart beat so strongly it felt like it would come out of my chest. It did this all the time, and I realized this is what having a healthy heart must feel like. So, why couldn't I shake my feeling of unease? That night, I had a dream. Laura was in her hospital bed, but her mother was gone. I could hear my heart, Laura's heart, beating in my eardrums so loudly it was painful. I tried to cover them, but my hands were pinned to my sides. Some unexplainable force was moving me towards the motionless figure of Laura on the bed. Her lips were blue, and the window had come open, whipping her blonde hair around her face. I was almost on top of her when her eyes flew open. They were milky white, the eyes of someone dead. Get out, she rasped, her voice guttural. I could hear the heart beat faster and faster, drumming until I thought I couldn't take it anymore. Then I woke up. The sound had been real. Laura's heart was so loud it felt like it would rupture my eardrums, and I screamed in agony, trying to cover my ears. It was useless. It was coming from someplace deep inside me. I could feel it reverberating around the hollows of my chest. I stumbled out of bed, gasping for air, and tried to find my phone. I needed to call someone, anyone, an ambulance or my mom, anyone that would pick up. Get out. It was a faint whisper over the hammering thump of Laura's heart, a low guttural voice that sounded like it had been made by an animal, and I crawled to the door, down the hallway, choking on my screams for help. My neighbor opened the door, his eyes as wide as saucers, beside me on the floor, clutching my chest. He drove me to the hospital as I cried in the passenger seat of his car. After about 50 different checkups, the doctors told me that absolutely nothing was wrong with me. They told me my heart was regular, my blood pressure was normal, and then everything was just going swimmingly. I stood in the waiting area, wallowing in my shame and frustration. That heart didn't belong to me. My phone buzzed on the counter. An unknown number. Great. That was all I needed. More unexplained scary things like a stranger on the end of the phone. My voice sounded small on the line. Hello? Good morning. This is the Thames Valley Police. You've called to report an incident that occurred in your flat around 1:30 a.m. today. I felt a wave of embarrassment. I'm so sorry. I had a surgery and wasn't feeling well. I had to have my neighbor drive me to the hospital, and I think I panicked a little in the hallway before I left. There was a small silence at the other end of the phone. I'm afraid this is something you might want to be sitting down for. I felt Laura's heartbeats strong and calm. There was an incident of forced entry by Mr. Samuel Matthews. According to our police records, he's your ex-partner, and you filed a restraining order against him in September 2017. My blood ran cold. I did? He's in police custody. We found an automatic weapon on him, and we believe he had the intent to harm you. We have an officer currently stationed at your flat who can fill you in depending on how long your hospital stay will be. I thanked him and hung up the phone. For a moment, I leant against the wall, the horror slowly spreading over me. If I had been in my flat 10 minutes later, he would have found me. Laura's heartbeats filled my ears again, but now they were gentle, calming. Her mother said she dedicated every part of her to helping those who needed it. I put both my hands on my chest, overwhelmed by my own gratitude, and listened to Laura.
Really liked the turn on that one. That was a good one.
Yeah.
And
That ended nicely.
That is the house guest you do invite back.
That's the
Couldn't
little
agree
heart
with you
goblin
more.
that saves your life.
Oh my god, a heart goblin.
Yeah, I like that one. I like helpful ghosts.
Yeah, that one was like way more, like that was super feel good in a weird way. Like,
Would you say it was heartwarming?
oh
was-
my
God.
god.
I was like a couple seconds behind you.
That's okay, Jonas. Everyone's behind me.
Okay.
Oh my god.
Anyway, I do believe... Is it Rage next?
Alright.
Oh yeah.
This one's not very long, but it's very good. So, for the approval of the Midnight Society, I present Gateway of the Mind. In 1983, a team of deeply poised scientists conducted a radical experiment in an undisclosed facility. The scientists had theorized that a human without access to any senses or ways to perceive stimuli would be able to perceive the presence of God. They believed that the five senses clouded our awareness of eternity, and without them, a human could actually establish contact with God by thought. An elderly man who claimed to have nothing left to live for was the only test subject to volunteer. To purge him of all of his senses, the scientists performed a complex operation in which every sensory nerve connection to the brain was surgically severed. Although the test subject retained full muscular function, he could not see, hear, taste, smell, or feel. With no possible way to communicate with or even sense the outside world, he was alone with his thoughts. Scientists monitored him as he spoke aloud about his state of mind in jumbled, slurred sentences that he couldn't even hear. After 4 days, the man claimed to be hearing hushed, unintelligible voices in his head. Assuming it was the onset of psychosis, the scientists paid little attention to the man's concerns. 2 days later, the man cried that he could hear his dead wife speaking with him, and even more, he could communicate back. The scientists were intrigued, but were not convinced until the test subject started naming dead relatives of the scientists. He repeated personal information to the scientists that only their dead spouses and parents would have known. At this point, a sizable portion of scientists left the study. After a week of conversing with the deceased through his thoughts, the subject became distressed, saying the voices were overwhelming. In every waking moment, his consciousness was bombarded by hundreds of voices that refused to leave him alone. He frequently threw himself against the wall, trying to elicit a pain response. He begged the scientists for sedatives, so he could escape the voices by sleeping. This tactic worked for 3 days, until he started having severe night terrors. The subject repeatedly said that he could see and hear the deceased in his dreams. Only a day later, the subject began to scream and claw at his non-functional eyes, hoping to sense something in the physical world. The hysterical subject now said the voices of the dead were deafening, hostile, speaking of hell and the end of the world. At one point, he yelled, "No heaven, no forgiveness," for 5 hours straight. He continuously begged to be killed, but the scientists were convinced that he was close to establishing contact with God. After another day, the subject could no longer form coherent sentences. Seemingly mad, he started to bite off chunks of flesh from his arm. The scientists rushed into the test chamber and restrained him to a table so he could not kill himself. After a few hours of being tied down, the subject halted his struggling and screaming. He stared blankly at the ceiling as teardrops silently streaked across his face. For 2 weeks, the subject had to be manually rehydrated due to the constant crying. Eventually, he turned his head and, despite the blindness, made contact with the scientist for the first time in the study. And he whispered, "I have spoken with God, and he has abandoned us." His vital signs stopped, and there was no apparent cause of death.
Ooh.
Who funded that? Who funded that stuff? I want to have a word with the grant people.
Yeah, that grant committee needs to be investigated clearly.
Yeah, no. That's no.
I do the bad science.
The bad touch science, yeah.
No.
Oh, that's something else.
Shane.
In
I think
Miffix's
it's-
tentacle facility, we practice the bad touch science.
We practice ethical bad touch science.
Oh my gosh.
Anyway, I think it's Rick's turn.
Beautiful, seamless segue.
I do what I can.
Was I muted? I forgot to unclick mute because I have like 3 different things.
No,
need to click.
you're actually not. You're actually
You're
not
not
unmuted.
in
muted.
Discord.
You're not muted.
In Discord, I
But
was
for
not muted.
stream.
I'm talking about the
Oh,
stream.
you were muted. Oh, dang.
Yep.
Okay.
All right.
All right, take 2.
Okay. For the approval of the Midnight Society, I present to you Knocking. It started when I was 6 years old. I was in school. It was the middle of a reading lesson, and I needed to pee badly. At that age, actually, a fair few kids still wet themselves, and I always got paranoid about embarrassing myself in public like that. I stuck my hand up and told Mrs. Zebby that I needed to use a bathroom. After the usual speech about how I should have gone at break, she gave me the key to the disabled access toilet, as it was the closest one to my classroom. It was the middle of fifth period, and the corridors were empty and seemed cavernous to me. I was a short, scrawny thing back then. I sometimes had trouble with doors, especially unlocking them, and I fumbled for a good minute or two in trying to get the blasted thing open. Anyway, as I sat on my porcelain throne, there came a knocking at the door. "Someone's in here," I called, disgruntled at the disturbance. There came a pause, then the knocking resumed. It was faster now, more determined. "Wait a minute!" The knocking slowed, and a voice replied. "Let me in. I need to come inside." The speaker's tone was thin and reedy, an adult I didn't recognize. I may have been 6, but I also had a fairly good understanding of bathroom etiquette, mainly that you didn't let more than one person into an area only slightly larger than a cupboard. "Go away!" The knocking intensified again until it was a frantic drum beat, just a few feet from me and out of sight. I heard the voice shouting something, growing more and more desperate. "Let me in. Just open the door, please." I was terrified by that point. The hammering and yelling were so loud, and yet nobody had come to investigate it. Eventually, my teacher came to find me, angry because I had been gone for almost half an hour. When I refused to open the door to let her in, she got a spare key from the receptionist, then took me to the headmaster's office and called my parents. I was suspended for the rest of the week. I never told anyone what happened. It was just a few weeks before my next encounter with this phenomenon. I had just celebrated my 7th birthday, and my family was having a barbecue in my honor. It was a gloriously sunny day, but as soon as we set everything up, the allotments behind our house, the coal refused to light. My dad asked me to go get some fire starters from the shed in the front garden. It was pretty cramped inside, and I wouldn't fit all the way, so I just opened it up, stood on tiptoes to reach the shelf holding my objective, then shut the door. "Open up! I need to come through!" The voice was not the one I'd heard the month before. It was deeper, more brooding and angry. I said nothing and hurried away. I had no idea what was happening, but it frightened me. As I walked away, there came a final thump, like a fist being slammed against the wood. I heard his voice again. "You little bastard! I'll rip your fucking teeth out! Let me through!" I ran back to my party and spent the rest of the day glancing over my shoulder. As you might have guessed by now, there were a lot of these voices. I count at least 30 total. Every month or so, I used to get them, pleading to be let through doors. Almost always, it would be immediately after I shut the door behind me, as though these strange entities had been following me. I never told anyone, but to be honest, I just got used to it. It always made me jump, and some of the voices would make me feel uneasy, but I knew that I was safe so long as I did not open the door. Some of the voices I got used to the extent I even named them. There was one which always used to appear at my front door at home. We have frosted glass. I could see a silhouette of an average-sized man wearing a cap of some kind. He never spoke, but occasionally would push envelopes containing blank pieces of paper through the letterbox. I called him the postman. He was one of the more unsettling ones. If I tried to speak to him, he would look up sharply, then begin knocking. I generally left the postman alone. 20 years on, and I have retained as much normality as possible. I have plenty of friends, and I even have an on-and-off relationship with a girl I met last year. Not bad for a guy who wakes up in the middle of the night and listens intently to noises you can't hear on the other side of the door. Yeah, my buddies think I'm strange and kooky, but they put up with it. They're all great. I'll miss them. You see, things have started to get strange. Well, stranger than usual, I suppose. 3 weeks ago, I awoke sweating and crying, though I do not know why. My dream had been, from what I recall, fairly normal, when a huge shadow had abruptly fallen over everything. Literally, the second I opened my eyes, there came a knocking at my bedroom door. Not just normal knocking, though. This was truly frantic. "Who goes there?" I yelled. "Please help us," it replied. I was surprised. It was the sadistic, angry voice I remembered from my father's shed on my 7th birthday, but it seemed genuinely sincere. There was a pain tone to it, too, as though the speaker was grievously wounded. I actually found myself pulling back the sheets to get up, but I hesitated. I had never before been tempted to open the door. I suppose as a child I'd so rigorously drummed into my head the idea that whatever lay beyond was evil that it was just common sense. To be quite honest, I came very close to letting the thing into my room that morning. I held out in the end. It got worse. Just 2 days later, I was in my local corner shop. I just paid for a bottle of milk and a newspaper when a great force slammed against the shop door. Simultaneously, a voice began screaming, a long, keening squeal of pain. I whirled to face the door, but there were so many flyers plastered over the glass I could only just make out the shape of a woman on the other side, flapping her palms against the window. The shopkeeper stared at me as though I were crazy. In the end, I asked if he had a bathroom I could use, remembered some half-thought-out excuse, and hid there for 10 minutes until the screaming stopped. There were 4 more incidents between then and now, a mixture of screams and tearful begging. The postman stopped by yesterday, too. He knocked, politely, before sliding his usual letter through the letterbox. Then another. Then another. A total of 10 plain brown envelopes. The postman waited for a few minutes, knocking occasionally, and then he left me alone. Each letter contained a sheet of A4 paper, but somebody had taken a black pen to the pages, scribbling and shading them with such vigor that there were large tears around the center and the edges were frayed. I shoved them back into their envelopes and tried to put it from my mind. Earlier, my bedroom door shook violently. It wasn't a scream or a howl or a roar that I heard. It was just crying. Dozens and dozens of voices sobbing quietly. Another blow struck my door. Plaster flaked from the walls and twirled to the carpet. Still no pleas or bargaining, just sobbing. Crash. I jumped up from my chair. Crash! A hairline crack split the frame of the door in one corner. My phone began to ring, and I heard a sharp rapping at the glass of my window behind the curtains. I tried answering the phone, but it was simply yet more voices crying. Not even sobbing, though, more like bawling in terror and anguish. I hung up, but it kept ringing, so I took the battery out. I've shoved most of my furniture against the door and window. It has been 3 hours since the latest attempt at entry began. The battering has not abated, nor has the crying. I'm fairly sure that my door won't hold much longer. As for my mediocre barricade, it could be swept aside in 2 minutes. I find myself faced with a very real possibility of death, or so I'm writing this memoir of sorts, just in case something does happen. Crash. What do they want? Crash. Do they even want to hurt me? Crash. They seemed fearless, even malicious before. Crash. What could have driven them to this? Crash. Maybe I should open the door. Crash. Maybe I should let them in. Silence fell. I realized that even the crying had ceased. For a whole minute I sat there, then I got up and hurried to my door, eager to escape this claustrophobic situation. Perhaps I'd go outside, where I could be far away from any doors, and from the damn knocking. I pulled away my barricade and turned the handle. Locked. Kneeling, I peered through the keyhole. Beyond my bedroom door was not the corridor that I remembered, but another room. Some kind of library or classroom, I think. It seemed unoccupied, but for one kid sitting and reading with his back to me. I banged on the door. Hey, kid! Let me out, okay? He glanced over his shoulder. Yeah, over here. Could you open the door, please? I can't. I'm in detention. I'm not supposed to talk to anyone. Go away. He turned from me. Confused and exasperated, I began to stand up. A loud bang shattered the silence once more. I realized it sounded like a fist being pounded against glass. My window. I heard it again, but this was not the frantic knocking of somebody wanting to get inside. This was not even an attempt to break in. Whatever was beyond the curtain and glass, I knew I was inside. Whatever was beyond the curtain and glass knew I was inside. It knew I was frightened. In the most predatory and sadistic way possible, it wanted me to be afraid. I turned back to the door and began hammering on it frantically. Hey, let me in, okay? I really need you to open the door. The end.
Oh, I get it. It was the thing, and he was the thing, and they were the thing.
Has
Well,
joined the Think Fray now.
he has.
Nice.
Just a cycle of one person banging on another, banging on another, banging on another. Or on their doors, at
Perception.
least.
Yes. It's just the Never-ending cycle of banging.
That's wink,
I
wink.
don't. Why am I
Stoker.
like this tonight? I don't even know.
Why am I even with this crew anymore? Oh.
Well, I guess it's my turn, huh?
It is
Yeah.
Stoker's turn.
Yes.
Okay. This story is a little dated because it talks about Google Maps like it's a new thing. I have no idea when it was actually posted, but you know, whatever. It's still spooky. It's still fun. It's still spoopy. So, submitted for the approval of the Midnight Society. Satellite images. A friend of mine showed me how to use Google Maps. I'm sure you've seen it. It lets you use satellite images to look at locations all over the world. See, a few years ago, I was in a car accident. Since then, I really don't leave the house that often. It's difficult, and the idea of seeing a car drive by me makes me feel lightheaded. I was fascinated by the fact that I could see all over the world, almost like being there. I could virtually walk down the streets, and it almost felt like I was really there. I became instantly hooked. It gave me a real eye on the world. I could go to any major city, and I did. I'd seen streets in China, Japan, Germany, England, so many places. I'd even gone to tourist attractions like the Great Barrier Reef and Dracula's Castle. My favorite was to go to random places in major cities and see how many people and animals I could find. The faces of the people were always blurred to protect their privacy, but it was still enjoyable to see them out there, enjoying their life, walking like it was no big deal. She must have good taste, I laughed. I zoomed in closer and noticed the gray bag she carried on a gray and purple shoulder strap. She was walking in a relaxed manner, one hand trailing the wall beside her. I bet if I could have seen her face, I would see that she was smiling. I began to feel a little sad. I let my hands fall into the arms of my wheelchair and looked at her for a minute more. I wish that I could be there, walking so carefree with her. That wouldn't happen, though. Until I died, I was stuck in this chair. I sighed and zoomed out of Tokyo. Enough of this for tonight. I turned off the computer and went to bed. I got up early and decided to look around Paris. Paris was always fun. I liked the look of the city, with all of the old, beautiful buildings and so many people to watch. I randomly zoomed to an area and saw a street lined with old brick buildings, a few small shops, and an old tan brick church. Ahead was an intersection, and dozens of people walked by. A balding businessman walked quickly past, looking back at an old woman, hair covered with a scarf, carrying a large purse. A curvy woman in black pants that were far too tight stared into a store window, and two women led a group of small children around a corner. I spun the view around a few more times, and then saw something peculiar. Sitting on the bench at the bus stop were two people. One of them was a young woman with her feet stuck in front of her in a relaxed manner. She was wearing a pair of red sneakers, like my own. I was startled for a moment as I noticed the black pants, white t-shirt, and black hooded jacket. Her dark brown hair was tied loosely behind her head. A gray bag sat on the bench beside her, the shoulder strap hooked over her shoulder. This is crazy, I thought. It can't possibly be the same woman. This is a different country, different continent even. How could it be her? This was stupid. It wasn't as if these were live photographs. They were taken ahead of time and then stored. It's not like she was in two places at once. She could just be a traveler. Besides, without seeing her face, it was impossible to tell if it was the same person. Brown hair was probably the most common hair color in the world. Those red sneakers were something I purchased online. I'm sure a million other people did too. I shook my head and went to fix some lunch. When I got back online, I decided to look at Berlin. I picked a random street, as usual. It looked pretty empty. There were brick buildings lining the streets, looking more like factories than anything else. There were also empty lots, full of long grass and piled gravel. There wasn't much to see at all, really. There was a line of motorbikes and a car with 2 German flags sticking up from it. After more searching, I found one kid. He looked like he was dressed for school, a jacket thrown over his bag. He was intently looking at some kind of mobile device. I was disappointed. I started to leave, but then I caught something out of the corner of my eye. I turned the view, and there they were. Those damned red sneakers. She was standing on a street corner, next to some kind of signpost. She had a hand on the post, looking down the street, as if waiting to cross the street. I stared in shock. How could she be there too? Even if she was traveling, there's no way I would find her every time. Even finding her in Paris would have been one heck of a coincidence, but this? This was crazy. Was this some kind of joke? Had Google decided to play a prank on its users that use their product so much? It would have been a great joke. I did a quick search, looking for a note about a woman that shows up like Waldo. There was nothing. I looked through articles on strange things you can see on Google Maps, but none of them mentioned the woman that travels the world with you. This was crazy. Had my self-imposed isolation driven me mad? Had I become so lonely that I created a hallucination for myself? Leaving the Berlin image on my screen, I sent a text message to a friend asking him to look at the locations. I asked him if he saw the same woman. Then I waited, hands sweating, heart thumping in my chest. I jumped when my phone beeped with a return text message 10 minutes later. The text read, "I see the lady you're talking about in Berlin. I didn't see her in Paris or Tokyo. Is this some kind of game or what? Are you okay?" I didn't respond, instead returning to the locations in Tokyo and Paris. There she was. She was there, but it was different. She no longer sat on the bus stop bench in Paris. She was standing in front of it, looking for something in her bag. In Tokyo, she was blocks away, squatting down to pet a calico cat. I shivered. Who was she? What was happening? I switched the map to Brussels. It was another city street. It was lined with old-looking buildings with shops on the ground level and what I guessed was apartments above. I quickly scanned the streets. They were empty, other than a stocky woman in a bright blue sweater. I did a second sweep. She wasn't there. I sighed in relief. I couldn't believe I was getting so worked up about this. It was nothing but a coincidence. I stopped, my eyes frozen on the screen. There was a building at the point of a fork in the road, white with black ironwork framed balcony jutting from the second floor. I hadn't seen her, as I had been looking at the sidewalks. There she stood, standing on the balcony, her head tilted in the direction of the camera, almost like she was coyly looking toward me. My breath caught in my throat. I switched to Sydney. She was leaning against the wall inside the doorway of a bright blue Carrick's Pharmacy building. London showed her getting ready to step onto a red double-decker bus, her head turned to look over her shoulder. She was everywhere I looked. She stood on a brick sidewalk on a bridge in Venice. She walked across a yellow-barred crosswalk in Zurich. And in Hong Kong, she stood between a Wing Lung Bank and a McDonald's adjusting the strap on her bag. In each picture, she came closer and closer to looking directly at me with her blurred-out face. My heart felt like a terrified bird slamming around inside my chest. I couldn't catch my breath. I wasn't sure what to do. I couldn't call the police. Should I send screenshots to Google? I clenched my fists tightly and closed my eyes. Who was she? Was she following me? Was I following her? I wished I could see the expression on her face, know what she saw when she looked back at me. I wanted to get out of the chair and run. Why is it that the only thing that made me feel free again was the thing that made me feel even more trapped? I had to know. I typed in the name of my town and zoomed into a random street. It was a couple of miles from my house. The gates to the city park were shown in the clarity of daylight, despite it being right there. There she was. There she was. She was only a few miles from my house, standing under the ironwork arch that stated the name of the park. She looked directly at the camera, directly at me. I felt like I might throw up. She was near me, and she was watching me. She was coming for me. What did she want? I typed in the name of the apartment complex where I live. I could see the outside of the building. The parking lot was full of cars, and there were a few blurred out children on the playground. I searched everywhere for her. She wasn't in the parking lot or on the sidewalks, not hiding between the buildings or standing in the playground. I even scanned each of the cars, behind the bushes, and each of the blurred windows. She wasn't there. I curled tightly around myself and lay my head down on the desk. This place was safe. I didn't leave the apartment anyway. I would never use Google Maps again. I would never see her again. She could stay at the park for all I cared. I smiled to myself and was surprised to find a tear slipping down my face. I'm safe, I said to myself in a whisper. It felt good to hear it out loud. I'm safe. As I said it, there was a knock at the door. A chill ran down my spine. I had a camera hooked to my computer that showed who was at the front door, which made it easier for me with my mobility issues. I slowly reached for the control to show myself who was outside, but my hand trembled furiously. As I touched the control, I realized my mistake. The last of Google's images that I'd seen had only shown the outside of the building. Just the outside. I looked at the screen and saw a woman in a white t-shirt, black pants, and black hooded jacket, and carrying a gray bag with a purple and gray striped shoulder strap. Of course, there were those red sneakers. She looked directly at the camera. Her face still a complete blur. As I tried to stifle a scream, she raised a hand and knocked loudly on my front door.
Oh, snap.
Ooh.
Nice.
Yeah,
makes me think a little
when you
bit-
started that story, I was thinking, oh, this is got to be like the Google Maps version of Rear Window, isn't it?
No, this one reminds me of that Mitch Hedberg joke where he's like, I think all the photographs of Bigfoot are fine. I think Bigfoot's just really blurry.
Google Maps will steal your soul.
I pressed play on the final TikTok, and the door was oddly familiar. Okay, you know.
And we have come full circle.
We
We
do.
have.
It's back to Gamathan Cobraham.
Yeah, Von Cobraham. Thank you very
Oh,
much.
sorry.
It's royalty.
Okay. All right. So to submit approval of Midnight Society, I submit to you The Dangers of Fame, written by Emma Froh. I woke to the sun shining through the slit of the curtains and an odd feeling. When I sat up, I was struck with confusion when I saw my surroundings. This wasn't my house. How did I end up passing out of the floor into someone else's home? Okay, think. What happened last night, I said, rubbing in my head in what seemed like a futile effort to make the memory return. Just then, something clicked. The party. My friends and colleagues had a party in celebration of another successful book completed. Did I really drink that much? No, it wasn't that. I knew what a hangover felt like, and this feeling I had wasn't that. Something didn't feel right. I didn't feel right. It was as if something was missing, but I just couldn't put my finger on it. I went to stand up, but froze at what I saw next. I saw blood that smeared and stained the hardwood floor. I jolted to my feet and searched my body for any cuts or scars. I found nothing. If it wasn't the one who hadn't been hurt, then that meant that someone else was here with me, possibly bleeding to death. I shoved my hands in my pocket, rummaging around for my phone so I could call for help. Searching my pockets for the phone led to no avail. And I looked around the room once more to see if there was a phone I could use. I saw nothing. I explored my unfamiliar environment only to find that there was no phones whatsoever in the house. Maybe if I went outside and found the neighbors, they could help. I looked outside and saw that I was in the middle of nowhere. I had no neighbors to call upon, and this was bad. I had to find the other person, get out of here fast. I looked everywhere, opening door after door. I looked at bedrooms, bathrooms, upstairs. I called out to the person, hoping they would yell back and I could pinpoint their location. I heard nothing. Suddenly, one second. Suddenly, out of nothing, I heard a truck pull out outside, and I ran down the hall in a panic. I came face to face with yet another door, and it was open through, and I could only assume that at the time it led to the basement. I heard footsteps marking their way to the front door. I entered and quickly made my way into the darkness. I tried to be as careful as I possibly could when descending the steps into the pitch-black basement. As soon as my foot touched the floor, I heard a door upstairs open, then slam shut. "Honey, I'm home, and I got a surprise for you," he shouted, as I heard footsteps making their way down to the basement. I stood with a pound, trying to find a place to hide or something to hit him over the head with. Just then, I tripped over something. I hit the ground and started feeling around to see if I could figure out what it was. I grabbed a hold of something, someone's foot. For a split second, I was relieved to have found the other person. It was still kind of dark, so I couldn't really see much, but I was able to make out the shape of a girl sitting in a chair. "Don't worry," I said. "We'll get you out of here soon." Our captor was at the threshold of the basement, and I turned around looking for a place to hide. Something caught my eye. I saw tools that were sprawled out at the top of the table, glistening what little light filled the room. I scurried under the table and pressed myself lightly against the wall. I saw a bat leaning against the side of the table. He wasn't paying attention. That's when I'd make my move and get both of us out of here. He turned light when he hit the bottom step, and the captor came into view. Well, the bottom half of him, anyway. He was wearing dress shoes and a tux. I saw the girl a little more clearly now. She was covered with scars. Her skin was a sickening tint of white from the amount of blood she lost. "Isn't it beautiful?" "Well, it's not near as beautiful as you are, though." The old man draped a silky white dress off the girl and got down on one knee. The edge of the table was just barely covering his face. What's it gonna? Just getting blocked. One second. I apologize. 1 second here. Okay, so don't worry. We'll get out here soon. Oh, isn't it beautiful? Well, it's not as beautiful as you, Froh. The old man draped a silky white dress over the girl and got down on one knee. The edge of the table was just barely covering his face. He took her hand and slid a ring on her ring. The way her arm dropped to her side reminded me of a rag doll. I wonder how she could be so calm and so still in the situation. That's when I realized the grim face that she was dead. I let out a gasp and quickly covered my mouth in an effort to stop the noise. The man didn't seem to notice. "You made me a very happy man, you know that? I mean, we had our moments, but I never stopped believing that we'd be together someday." I listened closely to him. He sounded very familiar. Did I actually know this psycho from somewhere? He stood up and made his way towards the table, and I slowly extended my head towards the bat. He shuffled through his tools for a short and for a second, and finally found what he was looking for. Book dropped to his side. My book. He turned around, gave the corpse a kiss on the cheek, and made his way towards the stairs. Now's my chance. I gripped the bat and shot out from under the table, and when I was right behind him, I closed my eyes and swung him as hard as I could. After a moment, I opened my eyes and saw him standing not 3 inches from my face. I jolted back and fell. I closed my eyes again and started frantically swinging. "Get the hell away from me!" I kept waving the bat around here, hoping that when I opened my eyes again, he would be laying face down. I stopped for a second, hesitantly opened my eyes. He was still standing, looking straight ahead at the body in the chair. How is he still standing? How can I know it's me screaming hit him with a bat? I let you get ready and as he said, and make things up his way up the stairs. After seeing his face, I could have sworn I saw him at that party. It was one of the waiters. He brought me my drink. Then, the rest is kind of fuzzy, but I vaguely recall him carrying me up to the truck. Then I was here, and he took the bat and... Wait. The bat. I got ready to swing it again, only to find I wasn't holding it. I looked back at the table, and there it was, propped up against the side. I could have sworn I had grabbed it. What the hell is going on? Then I saw something that explained why I couldn't grab the bat and feeling I had earlier. That feeling that something was missing. I suddenly realized I was missing. What I was missing was a heartbeat. When I saw my body sit in the chair with the forehead bashed in. And that's it.
Dun dun dun.
Dun dun dun.
The plot twist was she was actually Bruce Willis.
I thought it was longer than that, but oh well.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard to judge how long they're going to be. I've had stories I've been like, oh, this will last about 10, 15 minutes. 3 hours later.
Oh, I suppose it's back to me then.
I suppose it is.
It is.
All right. Let me
Ron
see.
Rapp said, then who was Bat?
I was Bat. I thought this was established by now.
And I was Cat, so I can't be Bat.
Well, how about that? Anyway, Jonas.
All right. Submitted for the approval of the Midnight Society. This is one written by Stephen Allen. It's titled Expires October 31st. It was October 26th, and I was at the supermarket grabbing a few things that I would need for Halloween before it closed. Specifically candy to hand out to the kids in my neighborhood. While I was there, I picked up a few other things that I needed as well. I grabbed some new body wash, as well as some ice cream sandwiches. While I was picking up the ice cream sandwiches, I figured that I might as well grab a gallon of milk since I was already back there. So I went over to the refrigerators that held the milk and began looking for a gallon with a distant expiration date. To my dismay, they were all nearly sold out of milk. I sifted through the selection of milk that they did have, only finding deeply discounted gallons of milk that expired in a day or two. I liked my milk and all, but downing a whole gallon in 48 hours seemed like a bit of a stretch. Eventually, I came across a gallon that's expiration date was October 31st. Halloween, how do you like that? I don't think I've ever had a gallon of milk that was set to expire on a holiday, not that I keep track of that kind of thing. Although, come to think of it, I may have had one a few years back that expired on Arbor Day. It doesn't really matter. I grabbed the gallon of milk, threw it in my cart, and headed towards the checkout. I got home and put away my groceries. When I put the gallon of milk in the fridge, I could have sworn it was pulsating. It was late, and I figured it must have been my eyes playing tricks on me. So I just headed to bed. The next morning, I had a serious hankering for some cereal. I poured the cereal in my bowl and went to grab the milk. I got the milk out of the fridge, but when I tried to open it, I couldn't get the cap off. It was really stuck on there. I Googled methods for getting stubborn caps off of bottles and tried just about all of them, but nothing worked. I got mad, and in a fit of rage, struck it on the counter. Not the best idea I've ever had. Now, you would have figured that the plastic container would have exploded on impact, and I would have been left with a mess to clean up. But to my surprise, it didn't burst. Had I bought the world's only impenetrable milk carton? Whatever, I thought, and I just ate the cereal sans milk. I put the milk carton back in the fridge, figuring that I could maybe open it later. However, when I put it back in the refrigerator, it had begun pulsating again. What is this? I don't know if you've ever flipped off a carton of milk before, but I sure have. I had forgotten about the milk for a couple of days, until the night before Halloween when I was looking through the fridge. I moved some things around before laying eyes on this enigmatic gallon of milk, and noticed that this time it was glowing slightly. This is getting even more strange, I thought. Having not even so much as opened the gallon of milk yet, and with its expiration date fast approaching, I just threw it in the trash. Figuring it wasn't going to get drank, not that I would want to drink it anyway, and it was only $2.50 wasted. I'll run out and get another less problematic gallon of milk in a few days. The next day was October 31st, Halloween, and everything was pretty par for the course. The neighborhood was complete with decked-out houses, sporting all manner of ghosts and goblins and jack-o'-lanterns. It truly was my favorite holiday. The day went on like normal, with nothing of note really happening. As it got later on in the evening, trick-or-treaters began showing up at my door. "Trick-or-treat," they would yell. Before I would make my way to my front door to give them their candy, I saw princesses, vampires, pirates, a multitude of superheroes, and even one kid dressed as a toaster. Hey, it's Halloween. You can be whatever you want, even a kitchen appliance. I packed it in around 9 p.m., figuring that I wouldn't likely be getting any more trick-or-treaters. I began to nod off on my couch before remembering that it was garbage day the following day, and I had forgotten to take the trash out. When I went over to the trash can and opened the lid, I saw that the gallon of milk was no longer inside. This was confusing to say the least. I mean, it's not like it spread its legs and walked away, right? Just then, I heard a shrill whine from behind me. I turned around to see the gallon of milk on the kitchen floor, glowing and pulsating. I was frozen in place, not knowing what to do. It let out another whine before it started chasing me. It chased me all around the kitchen, squealing an unholy squeal. Things were starting to get weird. Just now. The gallon of milk then cornered me and started inching closer. When it got within a couple of feet, I gave it a swift kick in the label. It let out a grunt and flew a couple of feet in the air, and I crumpled to the ground in pain, clutching at my now throbbing foot. What was this milk made out of? Cement? I looked around, not being able to locate the milk. I got up slowly, favoring my injured foot, which I now was pretty sure was broken. I hobbled upstairs and barricaded myself in my room. After not too long, there came a banging at my door. I crawled over to my gun cabinet, pulled out my shotgun, and loaded it. It didn't sound like my door could take much more stress. So, preparing for the worst, I hid on the other side of my bed to outwit the gallon of milk. After three more good slams against the door, it gave way, and the gallon of milk barged its way inside. As it made its way through my room, I could hear it making these odd, low gurgling sounds. I could hear it getting closer and closer. When finally I sprang from behind the bed, and began firing at the gallon of milk. I was blasting holes in my floor, but didn't even care. I finally had the milk on the run. It scurried away from me, eventually tumbling down the stairs. I would have run after it if it weren't for my bum foot. So I scooted down the stairs on my butt in the manliest way possible. While I was making my way downstairs, that blasted a hole in the ceiling. Damn, only one round left. I had to make it count. When I made it to the bottom of the stairs, I stood up on my one good foot and began hopping while still holding the shotgun. As I rounded the corner to enter the kitchen, I fell flat on my face and dropped the gun. That damn gallon of milk had set up a trip line. That cunning bastard of a dairy product. When I looked up, I saw the gallon of milk ahead of me, now wielding a knife. Not sure how, since it didn't have hands. It charged at me as fast as it could. Being in a prone position and not knowing what else to do, I waited for it to get within striking distance and then lunged forward, punching it with all my might. The knife went flying, the milk fell over, and I'm pretty sure my hand was broken now too. I looked over at the gallon of milk, which was now not moving. Guess I showed it who was boss. I got up and shambled my way over to the couch and collapsed on it. I got up my cell phone and called the police to report the attempted murder by way of dairy. They didn't believe me, assuming I was pranking them, and warned me about wasting the emergency service's time and resources before hanging up on me. Despondently, I set the phone down on the couch beside me. I then grabbed the remote and turned on the TV, figuring I might be able to catch a good horror movie. I found one and settled in to watch it. Not 2 minutes later, a horrendous screech came from the kitchen. It was the gallon of milk, now glowing something fierce. Oh no, I thought. I got up slowly, hopped over it, and began cussing out a dairy product only for the 9th time in my life. When I was done hurling insults and swearing at it, the gallon of milk let out a disturbingly high-pitched scream of a sound that could wake the dead and probably kill the living. The gallon of milk lurched up at me and began rustling around the living room. The tenacious gallon of milk would just not quit. When I eventually gained the upper hand, I threw it across the room and made a break for the back door. I hopped on my one good foot out the back door and through the backyard until I felt a shooting pain in my leg and fell to the ground. I looked down to see what had happened, and to my shock and horror, my leg was caught in a bear trap. The gallon of milk had set up a bear trap in my backyard. How? When? I swear, this is the last time I buy mutant dairy products. I looked up to see the gallon of milk slowly and forebodingly making its way through the backyard towards me, now brandishing a Colt 45. Where did it keep getting all these weapons from? Well, it clearly doesn't really matter now, I suppose. This was it for me. I had nowhere to go. I was trapped, and a gallon of milk with a gun was coming ever closer. That's when it all became crystal clear. It wasn't the milk that was set to expire on October 31st. It was me.
Jonas, what the actual fuck?
Garbage day!
That was funny, though. I loved it.
See, I see the written by Stephen Allen, but I'm calling bullshit. That was written by Sam Raimi.
I'm with you.
Like, that was Ash versus Evil Dead kind of shit the whole way.
Whoever wrote this, they are guaranteed to be lactose intolerant.
Oh.
That was good, though. I got a good laugh at that.
That was magical. I laughed. I cried. I developed a strange craving for cereal.
Uh-oh. The milk has infected you, too.
Oh, no.
Don't listen to his cry. It's called. Oh, it was amazing.
It makes its way towards you with the gun cocked, and it puts it directly against your head. And just before pulling the trigger, it looks you right in the eye, and it says, "Got me."
Oh my god!
Amazing.
Oh my gosh.
Got me.
Well, I don't know how anyone's going to follow that one up.
The thing is, I just don't. I don't. It's over. We all go home.
Okay, well, thank you all
night,
for coming.
everybody.
No.
No, we still have half an hour left.
I know. I have got one from Mask called Mama that I'm going to read. It is not the milk, but you know what? We shall continue.
Nothing
Back
is
into the
milk.
serious. Submitted for the approval of the Midnight Society, I am sharing Mama by Mask. The crickets became a symphony outside, the violins and oboes crescendoing in a final overture. Even through the window, the symphony was like a car horn. My bed frame creaked along with the symphony, but the chords were discordant. Honey, my mom called out from the bathroom, her voice like a paper airplane on the wind. Can you please get my novel? I sighed a little. It was that time again. Time to see her. I wrestled out of my cocoon I'd made in the bed sheets and placed my small feet on the floor. My small legs cracked a little, trying to come back to life after being in the same position since coming back from school. I knew where the novels were, next to Dad's bed. I opened the door to the hallway. I could see the dim light coming out from the bathroom, a street light at night on a dark highway. I could hear her humming some tune, but I couldn't recognize which one it was. As I passed by the door, her voice spoke up from behind the shower curtain, the water splashing. You know which one to get, dear. Dr. Heidegger's Experiment by Nathaniel Hawthorne. I replied back timidly. A silence, like a dull heartbeat, crawled through the air, and then she spoke again. Yes, you're a good boy. I nodded and continued towards the room beyond the bathroom. It creaked open like the last death rattle of an elderly man with influenza. I could tell my way through the dark, as the light bulb from the small lamp had burnt out long ago. I could see his corpse, my dad's corpse on the bed, his skull turned towards the bookcase. I could see the silk moths fluttering around his mouth, their own small family, rooting themselves in his cavities. I picked up the small footstool from next to the bed and placed it next to the bookshelf. Third shelf, right between The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka and The Master and Margarita by Bulgakov. I grabbed the spine of the book and went to come down from the footstool when I tripped. I could see the book, brittle and cracked, flying in the dark like a butterfly. The pages fluttered and then broke apart. It hit the bedside and ripped apart in two. Honey, what have you done? Her voice blasted through the old house, a shotgun next to my ears. My legs turned to stone as I looked towards the doorway. The water from the bathroom sounded as if an ocean came down into a small town, killing everything in its wake. Splick, splack, splack. I could hear her rugged feet coming out of the bathroom, the snapping of her bones as she walked on the crooked, moldy floorboard. I knew what I was going to get at now. If she had to walk out from her bath, one was in deep dirt. Her ragged, gnarled arms cracked into view from the dim light. They were outstretched like rulers, stretching more and more, calcium writhing out in pain. Her face came into view. Her ever-present smile sparkled in the dim light. Her neck grew out as long as her arms, the sound of bone mashing together. I knew that face over and over again, even though I was hiding underneath the bed. You know what's going to happen, don't you, honey? I started to cry a little, moving my head back and forth, feeling the pain from the other times wriggle up to the surface. Her feet were next to my face, her hair pressing against them. I was trembling fervently, knowing what I would see next. I could hear the snapping of her bones again, creaking down towards me. I could see her brightly white eyes, open like a window, staring at me from the small opening between the bed and the floor. Come out, son. You know what happens next. And that is the end of that snapshot.
Well, I'll be.
I know. Little snap of body horror.
No,
A
yeah.
little snap of body horror. He's like, Dr. Heidegger's experiment is an interesting story. But
See, so our story before, we had too much calcium, and this one we had a lack of calcium.
Nice.
We needed stronger
When-
bones.
when will we find the precise amount of calcium that we need? When?
Yeah. It's you, Stoker. Inside you was a skeleton.
Oh my god, you're right!
Every day we fight this keep the skeleton contained.
Knowing full well that inevitably the skeleton will win.
Evil was in their bones all along.
Yes.
One day our bodies will fail. One day the skeletons will emerge, and they will gather in the Bow Down.
They'll hatch like eggs. Little birdies.
I can't wait for my skeleton to hatch.
Weird.
It is Miller's turn.
It is
Okay.
Miller's turn.
For the approval of the Midnight Society, I would like to present. I've been flying for almost 30 hours, and the flight attendants won't stop crying. 30 hours ago, I hopped on a late-night flight from New York heading to LA. After boarding, I saw that I had an entire row to myself. Takeoff passed without incident, and soon I was stretched out for a nap across the row. I slept for a few hours. I don't know how long, but I woke up to some severe turbulence. It's possible that the lights in the cabin went out for a moment, but I was so disoriented that it's hard to say. I checked my phone to see that it was 4:03 a.m., which I figured gave me about an hour until we landed. When I looked out my window, I was shocked to see nothing but wide open ocean. My jaw dropped. There's obviously no ocean between New York and Los Angeles. I hit the button to call the flight attendant and spent the next few minutes racking my brain for a lake that could have possibly been big enough to explain what I was seeing. I jumped when the flight attendant and flipped off the light. She was grinning, ear to ear, and tears were pouring down her cheeks. "How can I help you, sir?" she asked. I froze for a moment. I had a reaction before deciding to just ask my question. Where are we? Why does it look like we're flying over an ocean? She wiped her cheeks to clear the tears, still grinning widely. "Sir, we'll be landing in about an hour." Okay, thanks, I said. After she left, I checked the clock on my phone again. 4:03 a.m. blinked back at me. It hadn't changed. I had to have been waiting with my call light on for at least 5 minutes. How was it possible that it hadn't changed at all? I opened up my laptop and saw it too displayed 4:03 a.m. I pulled out my phone and started a stopwatch on the app. I spent the next 2 hours looking back and forth between the clocks, waiting for them to change. They never did. I tapped the shoulder of an older woman sitting in the row in front of me. She looked back, an annoyed expression on her face. "Yes?" she asked. Do you know how long until we land?" I asked. She narrowed her eyes. "The flight attendant said it would be about another hour." I shook my head in confusion. "That flight attendant? We talked almost 2 hours ago. We should have landed already." She stared at me as if I was crazy. I was going to continue trying to convince her, but I felt a hand on my shoulder. I spun to see a male flight attendant grinning down at me, tears pinging off his cheeks onto my shoulder. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to calm down or I'll be calling the captain." I told him that wouldn't be necessary and sat back. He removed his hand and stepped away. The flight attendants continued to stop by every few hours offering meals. My stopwatch continued to tick up and is now telling me that I've been on this plane for more than 30 hours. I've explored all of coach and tried talking to some of the other passengers, but they've all told me that they're expecting to land in an hour or so. Around 3 hours ago, I tried getting into first class. I made it past the curtain, but was escorted back by 2 grinning flight attendants. Their grip on my arms was like iron. "Sir, the seatbelt sign is on," one said. "Please remain in your seat with your buckle fastened. We'll be landing in about an hour." I just about given up hope when a woman came down the aisle dressed in a business suit. She didn't look at me or slow down, but she dropped a piece of paper onto my tray as she made her way to the bathrooms at the back of the plane. I shot a look around before unrolling it. It said, "Are you stuck too?" I pulled out a pen and wrote, "Yes, it's been 30 hours." I folded a scrap of paper up and set it on the tray closest to the aisle. She left the bathroom and picked it up as she passed. It's been 20 minutes since then. I don't know why, but I don't think the flight attendants would like if they knew we were talking. It doesn't matter. I have to do something. I'll update you all with whatever happens next. Part 2. A few hours after the businesswoman picked up her piece of paper with my message, she came back down the aisle and sat in the seat beside me. She bent over, trying to stay low. "See her stack too?" she asked. I kept my voice low. "Yeah. Name's Jack, by the way. Nice to say to meet you, but..." She nodded. "I'm Mary. You're wrong. Getting the message is by far the best thing about the past day. Spent the last day and a half thinking I was alone in this." She paused for a moment, looking up the aisle. When she spoke again, her voice was a whisper. "So, Jack, you have any theories about what the hell is going on?" I considered lying, but decided the truth was for the best. I think we might be dead." Mary shook her head. "Maybe if it were just you, me, or you. If there's some cosmic train to hell, why would there be two of us who realize what's going on?" "No idea." Mary pulled out her phone and handed it to me. It displayed the Wikipedia article for flight MH370. The airline that disappeared in 2014. I read through the article carefully. There were a dozen of theories trying to explain what happened. They ranged from hypoxia to suicide to aliens. "Doesn't tell us much," I said. "Not much other than that this may have happened before," she said. "How about you? Any theories as to why anyone else can't see what's going on?" We talked it over and realized one thing we had in common was that we were both fast asleep at 4:03 a.m. There's no way we were the only ones asleep at that time, though. Maybe everyone else was just napping. I don't know about you, but I was well and truly asleep. The cabin lights flicked off, and a dozen red emergency lights on the floor flicked on, casting the cabin in a red glow. The intercom crackled to life, saying, "Passengers, please return to your seats. The seatbelt sign is fastened, and we may experience some turbulence. We'll be landing in about an hour." Mary froze. "Should I go back?" she asked. "Maybe they won't notice you're gone. But maybe they already know and they're just trying to separate us." Mary nodded. "We should stay together. That's a better idea." The intercom crackled again. "Ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to announce the arrival of the captain. We'll all be given the opportunity to speak with him. Please remain in your seats until he calls you. If you need assistance, do not worry. Flight attendant will happily help you on your way." Sounds of passengers getting to their feet echoed from further up in the plane. We sat in silence, trying to get a look through the curtain separating us from first class. "The captain?" I asked. "No idea, but it didn't sound like they were talking about a pilot to me. Did they?" "Nope." That was when the pungent smell of sulfur hit us. So strong I had to resist the urge to gag. It reminded me of the worst rotting eggs I'd ever smelled in my life. But the old woman sitting ahead of us didn't react. She just kept watching a movie on the back of her seat. "Don't cough," I said to Mary. We held our breath and fought it for a few long seconds before giving in, coughing hard and violently. A second later, the curtain opened. Mary and I froze, staring down the now red fuselage. 4 flight attendants passed through the curtain and made their way down the roads towards us. Grins stretched wide across their faces. They were still crying, but this time the tears streaking their faces were darker. It's hard to say with the lighting, but it looked like blood. My eyes weren't drawn to them, though. I looked over their shoulders at the figure standing near the front of the plane. It was a black silhouette standing beside the cockpit door. It was at least 8 feet tall and pointing towards us with a single finger. It had called us. "The bathrooms!" I shouted. We ran towards the back of the plane, the flight attendants closing in behind us. Blood dripped from their grinning cheeks onto the carpet of the plane. The captain is here, he said in a perfect customer service voice. His grin widened as he moved towards us. We made it to the bathrooms, jumping into opposite sides. I slammed the door shut and locked it, pressing my feet against the folding center part of the door to keep it closed. They began banging on the door and pulling at the handle while I fought to keep it closed. I'm sorry, but you'll both need to speak with the captain, one of the flight attendants said. Jack! Mary screamed. Jack, help! A distinct snapping sound like breaking metal came from her bathroom. She continued to scream as the sounds of struggle migrated up towards the front of the plane, towards the black figure I'd seen. I'd like to say I jumped out and fought them off, that I distracted them, or I did something heroic. I didn't. She was carried away, and a few short seconds later, her screaming was cut off. That was a few hours ago, and I'm still locked inside the bathroom. I keep trying not to think about what they've done to her. That thing at the front of the plane didn't seem human. I hope it didn't kill her, not after she was shouting for my help like that. I couldn't take that. I haven't heard any movement outside in a few hours, but I'm terrified to open the door. I'm far from the seat outlet, so my phone's almost dead, and I haven't eaten in way too long. If I go out there, will the flight attendants remember? What if that thing is still waiting for people? I don't have much time to make a decision, but I'll update you all here with what happens next. And a part 3. After another dozen hours or so, I opened the bathroom door. The lights in the cabin were back to normal, and I couldn't smell any sulfur. I cautiously made my way back to my seat and almost cried when the grinning, crying flight attendant came by offering a meal. That crappy airline food was the most delicious thing I'd ever eaten. When I'd finished, my mind immediately turned to Mary. What had happened to her? I crept down the aisle towards the first class, trying to keep a low profile. Surprisingly, the flight attendants were nowhere to be seen. They almost seemed to ignore me, almost as if they wanted me to find her. She had a rotor herself and was staring down at her phone in the window seat. I slid into the aisle and shook her arm. Mary! I hissed. She pulled out her headphones and stared at me with a surprised expression. Yeah? What's going on? Are you okay? I asked. What did that thing do to you? What did they do to you? I'm sorry. Remind me how I know you? What do you mean? I realized with a sinking horror that she had no idea who I was. I fought back tears. Mary, how long have you been on this flight? She checked the watch on her wrist. Well, it's 4:03 a.m., so a few hours at least. She stared at me the same way you look at a person claiming they were the second coming of Christ. Her tone was low and reassuring. Hey, don't worry so much. Look on the bright side. We'll be landing in about an hour. I felt an iron grip on my arm and looked up to see 2 flight attendants. Sir, this is for first-class passengers only. They were still crying and grinning, but just with tears this time. I could see the streaks of blood staining the front of their uniforms. I was escorted back to my seat where I spent the next several days. Attendants continued to stop by with food. I would use the bathroom, and soon was about going absolutely crazy with the monotony. In retrospect, those few days weren't so bad. There's a lot of content on the internet after all, even with crappy plane Wi-Fi. No, it didn't get really bad until around 10 days later when the Wi-Fi failed. It was sometime a week later that I lost control and began screaming for a flight attendant. They didn't come for several minutes, but eventually one did. Just let me see the captain, I asked. The flight attendant bent low and spoke with that same customer service voice. I'm sorry, sir. The captain has made his decision regarding you quite clear. Didn't answer his call and will, therefore, wait. How long? Quite a while, I'm afraid. Don't worry, though, sir. We'll be landing in about an hour. She strained and walked away. I started making notches on various parts of the seat back to keep track of different things. 1 notch for each time I used the bathroom, 1 for each meal, 1 for every time I watched a given movie, that sort of thing. It was hell. I watched every movie in the seat back a dozen times over. If I ever acted out badly enough, I would be escorted back to my seat by 1 or more flight attendants. Any attempt at conversation with other passengers was met with confusion by them, followed by a quick escort back to my seat. I I guess it was on or around day 30 that, in a moment of panic and psychosis, I broke my laptop and phone, screaming at the top of my lungs. No one around me reacted in any way. 2 months later, I stunk. The muscles in my legs were tight and cramped constantly. I finally concluded that suicide was my only option after my 128th rewatch of Thor Ragnarok. I got to my feet and limped towards the emergency exit. I knew normally the pressure inside the airplane forced the doors closed, but I figured that nothing about my situation was normal. If this didn't work, I'd find some other more painful way to go. I grabbed at the handle and swung it open. To my shock, the door opened easily, with no wind of any kind whipping around the cabin. It remained the standard slightly too cold temperature that had been for the past who knows how long. The open door called to me, the black portal out of the plane. I stared at it for a long moment, almost too long. An attendant's hand grabbed my shoulder, pulling me away. In a fit of anger and strength that surprised me, I wrenched away and jumped out of the plane. The wind whipping past my face was almost magical, a new sensation after so many months of the same. The ocean below me grew closer and larger, and I realized that suddenly I didn't want to die at all. It grew larger and larger until it seemed that all I could see was darkness and waves. I impacted the surface of the water so fast and hard that my entire body jerked around in the seat. I pulled my hand back, sucking at my bruised knuckle. I hit it on the seat in front of me. "No," I whispered, then shouted, "No! No! No!" A flight attendant ran down the aisle, kneeling beside me. "Are you okay, sir?" I clenched my hands into fists, almost swinging at her. But then I realized she wasn't grinning. She wasn't crying. To be honest, she looks a little more scared of me. I reached my right hand down to my pocket where I could feel my now unbroken phone. 4:04 a.m. "Sir, if you could calm down, we'll be landing in about an hour." My mouth tasted like ash. "Thank you," I managed. "I will." I stared unblinking at my phone. It now displayed 4:05 a.m. Then I looked out my window and began to cry at the sight of city lights below me. We did land in about an hour. Can't even begin to explain why or how, but I'm currently sitting in an airport cafe typing this out. I'm free. I'm out. And I'm never going flying again. Edit. I sure hope the bartender here at the airport just has a naturally wide grin.
Okay, but can you imagine the frequent flyer miles he racked up?
Oh my god.
You mean the ones that get you nowhere?
He checks his he opens up his account and he's like 100 million frequent flyer miles.
Have any of you ever seen the the 90s TV adaptation of Stephen King's The Langoliers?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Yeah, it's.
I remember specifically when it first aired on TV because I watched it in school.
It's amazingly bad. It's just like if you really want to see like a horrible Stephen King adaptation, that's just like so bad it's hilarious. That's the one right there. I'm only mentioning that because the whole like flight to nowhere thing.
At first it was creepy, but yeah, after time you realize, yeah, it was pretty cheesy.
Anyway,
But yeah, that was a fun story.
that was pretty good.
So I guess
It is almost midnight now.
yeah, I guess we'll be opening up with Rage on Halloween night itself.
Oh yeah.
Spooksters.
How does it feel? How does it feel, Rage?
It feels good. It feels spooky, but feels good.
Glad to hear it. I did it all for you, Rage.
Oh my god.
Exactly you are. So dedicated, Stoker. So dedicated.
Despite him being in rage, I'm still just a bird in a cage.
Wow.
Well then, do we declare this meeting of the Midnight Society closed?
I believe we do.
I think we do.
Sounds good to me.
Very well. Good night, everyone, and enjoy your flight home.
Yeah.
Oh.
Sweet screams.
no.
Good night.
Go with the zombie fight. Yeah.
Do make sure to join us next week, or beware.
And tomorrow night for Spoopus Factory.
The spoopiest game of all, math.
Boodle Station.
Oh my
Hey.
god.
Have a
All
good
right.
night, everybody. We will
Good
see you
night,
next time.
everyone.
Good night, folks.
Good night.
Goodbye.